Is tofu high in fat? Compared to what? A serving of tofu is 3 ounces, which is a small portion and contains 4 grams of fat. I try to limit my fat grams to 10 grams of fat per meal, with no more than 30 grams of fat per day. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of potatoes, tofu is more fattening than potatoes. There's 4 grams of fat in tofu compared to 0.1 grams of fat in potatoes. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of bananas, tofu is more fattening than bananas. There's 4 grams of fat in tofu compared to 0.3 grams of fat in bananas. We know that vegetables and fruit are low in fat. So let's compare tofu, which is a bean, to garbanzo beans, also known as chickpeas. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of garbanzo beans, tofu is more fattening than garbanzos. There's 4 grams of fat in tofu compared to 2.4 grams of fat in garbanzo beans. People use tofu in place of animal meat, so let's compare tofu to leaner animal meats and fatty salmon. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of skinless chicken breast, tofu is slightly more fattening than chicken. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of sirloin tib steak, which is considered a lean red meat, the steak and tofu are roughly around the same fat content, with steak being a mere 0.2 grams less fat. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of wild salmon, salmon is much more fattening than tofu. Tofu has 4 grams of fat for 3 ounces, and so salmon has 6.9 grams of fat. We know salmon is a fatty fish, so let's compare tofu with a low-fat fish, such as tilapia. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of tilapia, tofu is more fattening. If tofu is considered a high-fat food, let's compare it to high-fat foods. Most people don't realize that olives are high in fat. By comparing 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of black olives, olives have more than twice the fat than tofu. Tofu has 4 grams of fat. Olives have 9.3 grams of fat. Luckily, no one eats more than 21 olives at a time. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of tortilla chips have more than 4 times as much fat as tofu. With tofu at 4 grams of fat, tortilla chips has 17.6 grams of fat. 3 ounces of tofu versus 3 ounces of McDonald's French fries. The fries have almost 3 times as much fat as tofu. Tofu has 4 grams of fat, whereas the fries have 11.7 grams of fat. Walnuts are a healthy but high-fat food. By comparing 3 ounces of tofu to 3 ounces of walnuts, the walnuts are more than 14 times as fattening as tofu. Tofu has 4 grams of fat, and the walnuts have 56.7 grams of fat. 3 ounces of walnuts are easy to eat, unfortunately. A 3-ounce generic low-fat ice cream bar has 6 grams of fat. So the low-fat ice cream has more fat than tofu. If I compare 3 ounces of tofu to a 3-ounce burger from Sonic Burger, because the Sonic Burger was on the list of the 13 healthiest fat food burgers recommended by nutritionists, the burger has more than twice the fat as tofu. A 3-ounce Sonic Burger contains 10.5 grams of fat, whereas tofu has 4 grams of fat for the same portion. Oh, and if a nutritionist considers an animal meat burger healthy, that nutritionist should have their certification revoked. Oil is the highest fat food, so let's see how tofu holds up to olive oil. 3 ounces of olive oil, which is about a little over 6 tablespoons, is a whopping 85 grams of fat, whereas the tofu at 4 grams of fat seems tiny. If you want to lower the fat in your diet and reduce body fat, avoid all oils. In conclusion, beans and most fruits and vegetables are lower in fat than tofu. So tofu isn't a low-fat food. Tofu has around the same amount of fat as some lean animal proteins. Tofu is much lower in fat than high-fat foods like olives, salmon, chips, fries, nuts, burgers, and oil. The verdict? Tofu is not a high-fat food.